Hi, and welcome to MASS-HYSTERIA Radio. We're gonna get things started here with Concrete Swords with their track 11, 10, 11. And mix in some clips from Adam Curtis, documentaries, Ralph Nader. It's an interview with Francis Boyle, and some other stuff. That interview with Francis Boyle was done by Scott Horton. Ralph Nader was talking with Bob McChesney. Adam Curtis says The Century of the Self Part 2, Engineering with Consent. And maybe a little bit of other stuff. We also have a house interview with Oliver North, who you may know from his Crimes Against Humanity.
In other words, we can look at something and say, it's pie in the sky, it won't work, etc. Or we can be inherently cynical or skeptical. What I want to try to do is push it to a level of rigor, where you push for rigor, which is what you're known for. We push to respond, but we at least can start with a test case.
Sorry about that, it was a little wardrobe malfunction.
And I mean, that clearly is no longer the case. Now when you go to the Hill, I mean, you're perceived as sort of the radical fringe, I assume.
Well, it's because when the government started closing down, and it was corporate government, we should always use an adjective. Every major agency department, the biggest single outside influence is corporate lobbyists. They have 20, 30,000 of them here in town, all connected back home with their agents, insurance agents, auto dealers, and all kinds of cash campaign money from their PACs. And they have their own media, of course. So I had to basically look at my friends in the civic community here with millions of dues-paying members back home. And I got votes through both. To another column. Well, little did I know that the mindset of 99% of the voters in this country is least worst. They may not like their favorite party, Democrat, Republican. They'll vote for the least worst. And unless you're, a Perot with billions of dollars, and you can be on the presidential debates, which have been controlled since then, since 1992. So
My Jackville part.
Unless you
My quarter-inch
get on
Jackville
TV
part.
and pay for it, like Perot's 30-minute presentation, the only way to get to tens of millions of people, no matter how much you campaign and how many Madison Square Garden type arenas you fill, as we did in 2000, you can only get through to 2% of the people compared to 50 or more percent on a presidential debate. So while it didn't work,
psychological techniques for selling any new product.
I don't know if in your work at the NSC, were you not assigned at one time to work on plans for the continuity of government in the event of a major disaster?
I believe that the question touches upon a highly sensitive and classified area, so may I request that you not touch upon that, sir?
I was particularly concerned, Chairman, because I read in Miami papers and several others that there had been a plan developed by that same agency, a contingency plan in the event of emergency that would suspend the American Constitution. And I was deeply concerned about it and wondering if that was the area in which he had worked.
I most respectfully request that that matter not be touched upon at this stage. If we wish to get into this, certain arrangements can be made for an executive session.
This life's on a screen, too quick to see, but still you get it subliminally.
And the current track is Wisp with On the Rails, and it's just about over. Next up, we've got Francis Boyle doing a little speecharoo, and Limousine Liberals. Limousine Liberals is a track brought to you by the group Ambient Anonymous.
But let's talk about yours first. I'm looking at a piece by Sherwood Ross at ukprogressive.co.uk, and I'm sorry, I'm not certain if this is where it originally ran, but it's called FBI CIA Tried to Get American Lawyer to Betray Arab and Muslim Clients. They tried to turn you against, to be an informant against your own client, sir? Is that correct?
That's correct. In the summer of 2004, two agents showed up at my office, identified themselves. My secretary is misrepresented themselves, businessmen who wanted to talk to me about international law. So, I let them into my office, and they immediately identified themselves as agents with the FBI and the CIA-FBI Joint Terrorist Task Force in Springfield, Illinois, which is about a 90-minute drive from here. So obviously, this was sort of a heavy-duty type interrogation. They interrogated me for 1 hour and repeatedly tried to get me to become an informant on my Arab and Muslim clients, which I refused to do. So they then went out and put me on all the United States government's terrorist watch lists. According to my lawyer, there were 5 or 6 of them, and as far as he could figure out, I was on all of them. We tried to get me removed. We appealed. He was informed that there is no way I could get removed unless the 2 agencies that had put me on there removed me.
What my father understood about groups is that they are manipulative, they're malleable, and that you can tap into their deepest desires or their deepest fears and use that to your own purposes. I don't think he felt that all those puppets out there had reliable judgment, that they very easily might vote for the wrong man or want the wrong thing, so that they had to be guided from above.
One of Bernays' main clients was the giant United Fruit Company. They owned vast banana plantations in Guatemala and Central America. For decades, United Fruit had controlled the country through pliable dictators. It was known as a banana republic. But in 1950, a young officer, Colonel Arbenz, was elected president. He promised to remove United Fruit's control over the country. And in 1953, he announced the government would take over much of their land. It was a massively popular move, a disaster. They turned to Bernays to help get rid of Arbenz.
United Fruit brings in Bernays, basically understood the way United Fruit Company had changed this from being a popular elected government, doing some things that were good for the people there, into this being very close to the American shore, a threat to American democracy, being at a time in the Cold War when Americans responded to issues of the Red Scare and what communism might do. He was trying to transform this and brilliantly did transform it into an issue of a communist threat very close to our shores, taking United Fruit again as a commercial client out of the picture and making it look like a question of American democracy, American values being threatened.
In reality, Arbenz was a democratic socialist with no links to Moscow. But Bernays set out to turn him into a communist threat to America. He organized a trip to Guatemala for influential American journalists. Few of them knew anything about the country or its politics. Bernays arranged for them to be entertained and to meet selected Guatemalan politicians who told them that Arbenz was a communist controlled by Moscow. During the trip, there was also a violent anti-American demonstration in the capital. Many of those who worked for United Fruit were convinced it had been organized by Bernays himself. He also created a fake independent news agency in America called the Middle American Information Bureau. It bombarded the American media with press releases saying that Moscow was planning to use Guatemala as a beachhead to attack America. All of this had the desired effect.
The Jacob Arbenz regime became increasingly communistic after its inauguration in 1951. Communists in the Congress and high governmental positions controlled major committees, labor and farm groups, and propaganda facilities. They agitated and led in demonstrations against neighboring countries and the United States.
What was profoundly new in terms of what Bernays did is he took this menace to our backyard in Guatemala. For the first time, we saw Reds a couple hundred miles from New Orleans, who Eddie Bernays had us believing were a true threat to us, that it was going to be a Soviet outpost in our backyard.
But what Bernays was doing was not just trying to blacken the Arbenz regime. He was part of a secret plot. President Eisenhower had agreed that America should topple the Arbenz government, but secretly. The CIA were instructed to organize a coup. Working with the United Fruit Company, the CIA trained and armed a rebel army and found a new leader for the country called Colonel Armas. The CIA agent in charge was Howard Hunt, later one of the Watergate burglars.
What we wanted to do was have a terror campaign to terrify Arbenz particularly, terrify his troops, much as the German Stuka bombers terrified the population of Holland, Belgium, and Poland at the onset of World War II, and just rendered everybody paralyzed.
As planes flown by CIA pilots dropped bombs on Guatemala City, Edward Bernays carried on his propaganda campaign in the American press. He was preparing the American population to see this as the liberation of Guatemala by freedom fighters for democracy.
He totally understood that the coup would happen when the public and the press, when conditions in the public and the press allowed for a coup to happen, and he created those conditions. He was totally savvy in terms of just what he was helping create there in terms of his overthrow. But ultimately he was reshaping reality, reshaping public opinion in a way that's undemocratic and manipulative.
On June 27, 1954, Colonel Arbenz fled the country, and Armas arrived as the new leader. Within months, Vice President Nixon visited Guatemala. In an event staged by United Fruit's PR department, he was shown piles of Marxist literature that had been found, it was said, in the presidential palace.
This is the first time in the history of the world that the communist government has been overthrown by the people. And for that we congratulate you and the people of Guatemala for the support they have given. And we are sure that under your leadership, supported by the people whom I have met by the hundreds on my visit to Guatemala, that Guatemala is going to enter a new era in which there will be prosperity for the people together with liberty for the people. Thank you very much for allowing us to see this exhibit of communism in Guatemala. You're welcome.
And for dinner, see what Mother has for dessert. Banana gingerbread shortcake. Just another of the many tempting ways in which this nutritious fruit can be prepared. So now that you've seen where bananas come from before they reach your table, our journey to Banana Land is ended. We hope you enjoyed the trip. We know you like bananas.
Bernays had manipulated the American people, but he had done so because he, like many others at the time, believed that the interests of business and the interests of America were indivisible, especially when faced with the threat of communism. But Bernays was convinced that to explain this rationally to the American people was impossible, because they were not rational. Instead, one had to touch on their inner fears and manipulate them in the interests of a higher truth. He called it the engineering of consent.
If you don't leave it up to the people themselves, but force them to choose what you want them to choose, however subtly, then it's not democracy anymore. It's something else. It's being told what to do. It's that old authoritarian thing.
But the idea that it was necessary to manipulate the inner feelings of the American population in the interests of fighting the Cold War now began to take root in Washington. Above all, in the CIA, who were going to take it much further.
One technique is that we ask people the same question.
They were concerned that the Soviets were experimenting with psychological methods to actually alter the memories and feelings of people. The aim being to produce more controllable citizens. It was known as brainwashing. Psychologists in the CIA were convinced that this really might be possible, and that they should try to do it themselves.
The image of the human being that was being built up at that particular time was that there was a great deal of vulnerability in every human being, and that vulnerability could be manipulated to program somebody to be something that I wanted them to be, and they didn't want to be. That you could manipulate people in such a way that they could be automatons, if you will, for whatever your own purposes were. This was the image that people thought was possible.
In the late 50s, the CIA poured millions of dollars into the psychology departments of universities across America. They were secretly funding experiments on how to alter and control the inner drives of human beings. The most notorious of these experiments was run by the head of the American Psychiatric Association, Dr. Ewan Cameron. Like many psychiatrists at that time, Cameron was convinced that inside human beings were dangerous forces which threatened society. But he believed that it was possible not just to control these forces, but actually remove them.
He thought that psychiatry should not just concentrate on sick people and mentally ill, but should actually go into government, that politicians should listen to psychiatrists. Psychiatrists should be in every parliament and should direct and monitor political activities, because they knew in a rational, scientific way what was good for people.
Cameron had set up a clinic in a hospital in Montreal called the Allen Memorial. It is now long since closed down. Cameron took patients who suffered a wide range of mental problems. His theory was that these resulted in forgotten or repressed memories. But he was impatient with the idea of using psychotherapy to uncover them. Instead, he would simply wipe them. Cameron used drugs, including LSD, and the technique of ECT, electroconvulsive therapy.
One technique is that we ask
It was
people the same question over and over
to relieve
again
depression.
and say, what do you want?
Cameron was going to use it in
really
a new
want?
way
What do you want that
to produce new people.
He was really using it to try and change the fundamental function of the individual, to alter their past memories, their past ways of behaving, and as I think he said at one point, to just sort of erase everything from their past so that you then had a slate in which you could record new ways of behavior. And so he used massive doses of shock, people receiving several shocks a day, and over a course of time, hundreds of ECT treatments, so that they were just used to a sort of a very primitive vegetable state.
I don't remember what happened to me. I was introduced to Dr. Cameron, and I don't remember Dr. Cameron at all. I don't remember any of that. They shipped me up to what they call the sleep room, and they gave me all of these electroconvulsive shock treatments and megadoses of drugs and LSD and all of that, and I have no memory of any of it. Nothing of that time of the Allen Memorial or any of my life previous to that, all gone, wiped.
And then having decattered somebody or brought them down to where basically nothing but the essential functions of the body were going on in terms of breathing and things of this nature, then he would begin to feed material into these individuals, positive material, such that the brain would be programmed in a positive way so that the individual would be completely altered.
Then he put these tapes under our pillows called psychic driving. He would then put back into this empty brain a program of whatever sort he decided upon, and the people like myself would wake up another person, I guess.
In fact, Cameron's experiments were a complete disaster. All he managed to produce were dozens of individuals with memory loss and the ability to repeat the phrase, "I am at ease with myself." And it was not an isolated case. Almost all the experiments the CIA funded were equally unsuccessful. Despite their ambitions, American psychologists were beginning to find out how difficult it was to understand and control the inner workings of the human mind.
We had been really chasing a phantom, if you will, an illusion, that the human mind was more capable of manipulation from the outside by outside factors than it is. We found out that the human being is extremely complex thing. There were no simple solutions. But you've just got to bear in mind that these were very strange times.
The psychoanalysts had come to this conclusion because of their theory. They knew how to control dangerous forces inside human beings. But now the psychoanalysts were about to face a high-profile failure that would lead people to begin questioning the very basis of their ideas. It began in Hollywood. The film industry had become fascinated by psychoanalysis. Anna Freud after the merits of dozens of assets in the century. They treated film stars, directors, and studio masters. Anna Freud's closest friend was the most sought after of all, Ralph Grease. And in 1960, the most famous star in the world turned to Greenspan for help. Marilyn Monroe was suffering from despair and had become addicted to alcohol and drugs.
Walked in dinner, he was Marilyn Monroe. I made a picture of it. Yes. And the other thing was that Ralph was trying to show her. Romy was trying to show her that the way a family life ought really to be. So we were walking the dog after us. I said, "What the hell are you doing here?" I said, "You never asked me to dinner." And he said, "You weren't that sick." And I said, "Oh, no." He said, "Well, it's just this child has no. In other words, she doesn't know what the goal is."
What Greenspan did was follow Anna Freud's theory. If Marilyn Monroe could be taught to conform to what society considered a normal pattern of life, that would help her ego control her inner destructive urges. But Greenspan pushed it to an extreme. He persuaded Monroe to move into a house nearby that was decorated like his own. He then took her into his own family life. He, his wife, and his daughter played at being Monroe's own family. Greenspan himself would become the model of conformity.
So was someone whom she regarded as important and she idealized, but he turned out to be a very gratifying father figure. Her ego would benefit from that. That was the theory. His wife and children, everyone was involved in it. They were strengthening the person. They were strengthening the mind. They were strengthening the agent that controls inner life against adversity, against insufficiency, against too much frustration. So that Marilyn Monroe would no longer be a helpless person looking for love. She'd have enough love.
But despite all his efforts, Greenspan was unable to help Marilyn Monroe. On August 5th, 1962, she committed suicide in her house. The suicide shocked many in the analytic community, including Anna Freud. And high-profile figures in American life, who had previously been enthusiasts for psychoanalysis, now began to question why psychoanalysis had become so powerful in America. Was it really because it benefited individuals? Or had it in fact become a form of constraint in the interests of social order? The critics included Monroe's ex-husband, Arthur Miller.
My argument with so much psychoanalysis is the preconception that suffering is a mistake, or a sign of weakness, or a sign even of illness, when in fact, possibly the greatest truths we know have come out of people's suffering. But the problem is not to undo suffering or to wipe it off the face of the earth, but to make it inform our lives instead of trying to cure ourselves of it constantly and avoid it. And avoid anything but that lobotomized sense of what they call happiness. There's too much of an attempt, it seems to me, to think in terms of controlling man rather than freeing him, of defining him rather than letting him go. And it's part of the whole ideology of this age, which is power mad.
Hey, have you heard about the crazy new way to send a message today? It's flashed on a screen too quick to see, but still you get it subliminally.
At the same time, an onslaught was launched on the way psychoanalysis was being used by business to control people. The first blow came with a bestseller, The Hidden Persuaders, written by Vance Packard. It accused psychoanalysts of reducing the American people to emotional puppets, whose only function was to keep the mass production lines running. They did this by manipulating people's unconscious desires to create longings for ever new brands and models. They had turned the population into unwitting participants in the system of planned obsolescence. The second blow came from an influential philosopher and social critic, Herbert Marcuse. He had been trained in psychoanalysis.
this is a childish application of psychoanalysis, which does not take at all into consideration the very real political systematic waste of resources, of technology, and of the productive process. For example, plant obsolescence. For example, the production of innumerable brands and gadgets who are, in the last analysis, all the same. The production of innumerable different marks of automobiles. And this prosperity at the same time, consciously or unconsciously, leads to a kind of schizophrenic existence. I believe that in this society an incredible quantum of aggressiveness and destructiveness is accumulated precisely because of the empty prosperity, which then simply erupts.
Marcuse's argument was not simply that psychoanalysis had been used for corrupt purposes. It was more fundamental. Marcuse said that the very idea that you needed to control people was wrong. Human beings did have inner emotional drives, but they were not inherently violent or evil. It was society that made these drives dangerous by repressing and distorting them. Anna Freud and her followers had increased that repression by trying to make people conform to society. In so doing, they made people more dangerous, not less.
Marcuse challenged that social world, and he said that's a world that should not be adapted to. And in fact, what the individual was adapting to was corrupt and evil and corrupting. In other words, he switched the source of evil from inward conflict to the society itself. That the sickness of society lay in the society level, not at the sickness of human beings in it. And if people did not challenge that, then they were in fact submitting to evil.
Modern psychology has a word that is probably used more than any other word in psychology. It is the word maladjusted. It is the ringing cry of modern child psychology, maladjusted. Now, of course, we all want to live a well-adjusted life in order to avoid neurotic and schizophrenic personalities. As I move toward my conclusion, I would like to say to you today, in a very honest manner, that there are some things in our society and some things in our world for which I'm proud to be maladjusted. I call upon all men of goodwill to be maladjusted to these things until the good society is realized. I must honestly say to you that I never intend to adjust myself to racial segregation and discrimination. I never intend to adjust myself to religious bigotry. I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few, leave millions of God's children smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society.
The political influence of the Freudian psychoanalysts was evident. Instead, they were now accused of having helped to create a repressive form of social control. Anna Freud and Dorothy Berlinger lived on in Sigmund Freud's old house in London. In 1970, Dorothy's son Bob died of alcoholism. And in 1973, his sister Maddie returned for yet more analysis with Anna Freud.
She went back for more analysis. She was living at 20 Maresville Gardens in the Freud house, as I guess she did when she wasn't with her husband, and she committed suicide. She took an overdose of sleeping pills. In Freud's own house, right. So, I mean, the obvious, there are a lot of implications that one can draw from that, and I just think she happened to reach the end of the rope there. Although it would seem to be a very pointed act obviously suicide is a very politicized act, and to do it in Sigmund Freud's own house is certainly different from doing it in Riverdale back in New York.
Next week's episode will tell the story of the rise to power of the enemies of the Freud family. They believed that the way to build a better society was to let the self free. But what they didn't realize was that this idea of liberation would provide business and politics with yet another way to control the self, by feeding its infinite desires.
You know not what it means. Someday you'll realize all those lies, and you know what it means to you.
sound, and on that sound, create the people, the world, the way you want to create it. The world, the way you want to create it. I want you to start to make that sound, and on that sound, I want you to start to make that sound, and on that sound, create the people, and on that sound, create the people, the world, the way you want to create it.
You can be what you want to be.
I want you to stop.
Trying to do the same sort of work in Washington. How Washington has changed?
Well, it's changed as the corporations have gotten so powerful on both parties that the government's been closing down for over 25 years on citizen groups, national citizen groups like Sierra Club or Public Citizen for Common Cause. And so it's a very instructive question you just posed. But I lost a lot of friends when I was young on traffic crashes. I got interested in why the auto companies don't put longer safety devices in cars, like seatbelts, padded dash panels, stronger door latches, airbags, head restraints, and better brakes, better tires. And I realized there was no regulation, no safety regulation. So I went to Washington as a young man and developed a strategy where I got connections in the Senate and the House, powerful people with the press, regular coverage, some contacts in the White House in Lyndon Johnson's time and Nixon's time. And we got the Motor Vehicle Highway Safety Law through in 1966, which is to say go from 1 million lives and many injuries with simple installation devices. And then did about a dozen laws. The key architecture of the environmental movement, air and water pollution control laws that came out in the early 70s, and then the Product Safety Commission laws, and of course the Freedom of Information Act amendments in 1974 that gave us the best freedom of information law in the world. None of these could be passed today. The great champions like Senator Magnuson, Chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee, Congressman Rosenthal, Congressman John Moss, they're all gone. Their replacements are overwhelmingly corporate Democrats and working with corporate Republicans. And so young people today are facing a real dip in any kind of democratic mobilization in Washington, at least. And it's because of four things. The globalization weakened labor unions. They were countervailing force. They were our allies, for example, getting OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Bill through, Environmental Protection Agency. The second was the huge expansion of political action committees from 400 in 1974 to, and they're all targeted. You have the auto dealer tax, you have the insurance tax, the banking tax, the oil tax, and they're just swarming over Washington. And the third was the systematic expansion of corporate lobbyists as they grew labor Trump and Washington. So the drug industry will have 500 full-time lobbyists on Capitol Hill when they want something. 500, plus they're willing to spend $300 million in lobbying and campaign contributions in one year. So it's very hard for the Sid Wolf Health Research Group and Public Citizens to counteract that thing. And then the fourth is the two parties have converged. As you know, I run for president because increasingly on corporate issues, the two parties are dialing for the same dollars. And rhetoric aside, in actual action, they have allowed more and more decisions in Washington to be made by about 1,500 corporations. So it's very difficult. And so we're at a low ebb now as a citizen community, and we've got to turn it around. And to turn it around, we've got to start with imagination. It's not enough simply to document abuses. As you know, you know better than most people. We're in the golden age of expose documentaries. Not just Michael Moore's, but a lot of others. There's never been more good documentaries exposing corporate crime, fraud, abuse, political influence, domestically and internationally, on the military-industrial complex, great books out on Lockheed Martin, etc. And there's never been a time when there's been more books coming out with less national coverage. No longer can Bill Ryder or Jim Hightower or Cutler get on Good Morning America. They can't even get on Charlie Rose. Very rarely can they get on Diane Rehm, even public broadcast. And that's the hidden secret of public broadcast, because from a distance, it appears like public broadcast is a liberal bastion and trying to ward off the right-wing claws in Capitol Hill at cutting their budget and so on. But in fact, public radio and public broadcasting have been overwhelmingly corporatized. They do good programming, but as we'll discuss, they don't do the incisive programming. Look at all the ads. You know, this company gives, this trade group gives donations to public radio and public TV. It's very, very irritating to see all the 15-second notices that they give. But they don't do as much muckraking as 60 Minutes, so the corporation known as CBS. So, between all of that, the gerrymandering of more and more districts so you have safe, re-electable districts, either Democratic control or Republican control. That's really the trajectory of the last 40 to 50 years. A decline in access to the courts, to regulatory agencies like the Food and Drug Administration, and to Congress. And so we're at a really low ebb. American history has been cyclical, as Arthur Schlesinger has pointed out. But we're still waiting, and the Internet doesn't cut it. Not cut it. Let me say that many times. It's a great medium to find out information, a great medium to find out what meetings are going on, but lousy for motivating civic action. Nothing can motivate civic action more than person-to-person meetings, starting in living rooms and moving to auditoriums and city council meetings and on up.
Yep. Well, President said anyway. Right? That's what's great. The lie only has to seem credible for a day or two, and they get away with whatever it is. They don't care if we call them out later.
Well, we have to get organized and do the best we can to fight back, Scott, because otherwise we are, as I said, we're after 9/11, it was sort of a de facto coup d'etat here in America by what in the Soviet Union they used to call their power ministries, Ministry of Defense, CIA, National Security Council, National Security Agency, FBI, and then later they created this monstrosity Department of Homeland Security. So that is really what we are facing now. And we are one step removed, one major terrorist attack away from martial law, which means military dictatorship. That means, military people going around the streets armed with weapons.
Obey or be shot, no arrested.
Right.
All right. Well, I'm sorry, we are over time, and I have to end the conversation here, but I really appreciate your time on the show. I hope we can do it again.
Well, thanks again.
Before they run off,
well, I guess we'll see what happens. All right, Scott. Well, thanks. Keep up that great work, and my best to Garris, Ramondo, and all the others there at AndyWard.com.
I think it's funny. I think it's funny.
Well, as I said, probably in these internment camps, right? Sort of like, what the military did to Japanese American citizens after World War II. That was a military order. They were put in military custody. And that was approved by the United States Supreme Court in the Korematsu case. Indeed, even, I believe, Justice Jackson called them concentration camps. And as Bush Jr. Officials have said publicly, they believe Korematsu is still good law, which it is. The Supreme Court has never overturned Korematsu. Now, there is the, after all this, we do have the Non-Detention Act that is supposed to prevent another Korematsu against U.S. citizens. But, I guess, I think their attitude is we'll pick them up now and worry about litigating it later.
Yeah,
that was
they got a War Powers Act too, right?
That's right. Obama's paid no attention to that. He simply violated that in the War Powers Clause of the Constitution. The testimony by his legal advisor, Harold Koh, was shameless and a disgrace and unprincipled. But what else is new? So, I mean, if you're prepared to do that, you're really prepared to do anything.
Well, now, at that point, that makes this next question kind of, silly and naive in comparison, but I wonder whether specifically you could cite laws that they broke in the way that they interrogated you in your office and tried to turn you as a snitch against your own client.
Well, I mean, clearly,
is that illegal?
Clearly, it violated their constitutional rights and my ethical obligations as a lawyer. I believe there are Department of Justice guidelines for dealing with lawyers that obviously they didn't care about. But, I see no point in, filing lawsuits over this. It's pretty hopeless anyway. And I just plan to carry on and continue to do my best to resist this police state and trying to prevent a military dictatorship, for sure. I see, my fate has already been determined, and I don't think the court's going to make a hill of beans difference here. So I'll just do what I can. And trying to carry on and continue to do my best. And I just plan to carry on and continue to do my best to resist this police state and trying to prevent a military dictatorship. Sure. I see, you know, my fate has already been determined, and I don't think the court's going to make a hill of beans difference here. So I'll just do what I can.
It helped me to stop living in the past and start building from today and using my experiences in a positive way to be a better person today and tomorrow.
And there's an enormous freedom from that.
I'm at the Oriental Theater with Timothy Shenko, who's the director of the Shorts program for the Milwaukee LGBT Film and Video Festival.
All right, good night,
which
everybody.
starts tomorrow, the 18th, and runs to the 21st, which is, so that would be Thursday through Sunday, or Monday?
Sunday.
Sunday. So do you go by Timothy or Tim?